Hey guys, this is Echo Soundworks, and you're checking out a mixing tip and trick tutorial video on ADSR. So in this video, I wanted to talk about layering and potentially a few ways in which you might be using layering that's actually hurting your mix and your productions, not making it better. All right, so let's just dive right in. Let's listen to this mix real quick, and nothing's really layered together. So pretty much everything is its own separated instrument. We have a sub here, and it is layered with a bass, but I can't call it a true layer because I'm just using this as like the top end. Right, then we have a brass stab down here, and then the lead. So you'll find that a lot of times, a lot of tracks that sound huge aren't actually crap ton of layers, right? A lot of times there's two different mix styles, or there's more than two, but two common ones is separation and then glue. And sometimes we try to mix those and blend those together, and that's a whole other topic for a whole other video that I want to make. But separation, right? All these are separated, so you can easily hear them in the mix. You can hear the brass stab. You can hear this arpeggiation from Serum. And you can hear the sub bass and the bass, right? So it's real easy to hear everything. Now, I tried to layer in this kind of like synth sound, this string synth sound, into the ARP, and it didn't sound as clean, it didn't sound as clear, and it took away from the subtle nuances in this ARP. There's some crazy stuff happening with the filter. And if I layered that, it kind of took away from it, right? So this is an example where you can get loud, you can get clean and clear mixes without layering. Now, there are times where you definitely should layer, and there are times where I would caution layering. Let's go through the times where I'd caution layering first. So layering low-end instruments and basses is potentially tricky, and it's generally very hard to do. This example in this track, I'm not using this as a bass. I'm basically using it as what's called like a top bass. You know, it's the top end of a bass. Now, if you find yourself needing to layer basses or low-end instruments, it's most likely a good way to realize you have problems in other areas of the mix. Because really, if you layer low-end instruments together, it's so hard for the ear to hear. You're basically just making your low-end louder. So why not just turn up your mix, or a little bit of saturation, maybe compression, anything to make it have more weight in the mix, right? Or maybe turn down other elements, or maybe you need to remove the low frequencies that are clashing with your bass line, right? So always ask yourself, if you find yourself layering basses often, ask yourself why you're doing it, and make sure you have a sound reason. All right, now another reason in which I think you should be cautious when you're layering is if you play a chord, or your chord progression, or you play a lead sound and you think, oh, this isn't very good, it's not very interesting. I know what I can do. I can make it better by layering. If you have that thought, roll up a newspaper and hit yourself. Take it from me. I used to do that all the time. I would layer stuff constantly, and it would do two things. It would make mixing really, really hard and slow, right? If you have 50, 60, 70 tracks to mix, it's a lot harder to mix than 20 tracks, 15 tracks, right? That's just simple math. Now, if you find yourself thinking, okay, I'm going to make this sound is not that good, I'm going to make it more interesting by layering, just delete that sound and start over. If I record a guitar that sounds like crap, and then my next thought is, I'll record another guitar over it that sounds a little bit better. I don't know how to add this up, but I feel like a crappy guitar plus a slightly better guitar doesn't equal a great sounding guitar track, right? And that would obviously ring true for any source of audio, whether it's a software, synth, vocal, whatever. So if you find yourself doing that, I would just start over or try to find a more unique, more interesting sound right off the bat. This ARP is a really good example of this. I could have played this ARP with another patch, or I could have played it with more like a simplistic patch. Imagine if I had played this same arpeggiated pattern in Serum with just a saw wave, and then I layered that with a square wave, then maybe I layered it with a silent sound, right? It's still not going to sound like that, because there's some weird wavetables going on. There's a noise sample that's coming from a string, I believe, And there's the reverb filter that's being modulated by some LFOs. Yeah, so there's some weird stuff happening there, and it's really cool. So if I were to layer with that, it would take away from it actually, because the ear is not going to be able to hear the subtle nuances that make the sound unique in the first place. All right, and finally, the third reason why I would caution you against always layering and doing a lot of layers is because it can be hard to control. It can be hard to mix, and especially if you're just starting out, you want to put yourself in the best position to succeed with your mix. And having 5 leads to layer together is a little bit hard. Now, if you are layering, and I still layer all the time, I think there are a few reasons in which you should be layering, but there's still ways in which you should kind of handle how to succeed when you're layering. Like, let's say, for instance, I didn't make this ARP in serum. Let's say I made it in silent, and it was just kind of like a boring saw wave or a square wave or a combination of the two or whatever it may be. Well, layering can create new and unique sounds when you treat it like that. But if you're treating it from the perspective of you just want it bigger in the mix, right? Just turn whatever you have up, compress something, side chain that away from another element, and then maybe, have something duck out of its way so it's louder in the mix, add more weight to it. But you shouldn't just be like, okay, well, I'm just going to layer these things together and try to hope the ear can hear these 4 or 5 different things. The ear's not that good at hearing, ironically. So if you're layering a lead or a chord sound, try to think of what you're doing as you're creating a brand new sound from those layers. Now, this becomes interesting. Let's say you're using a synth like Silent, and then you're using a synth like Serum, right? They each have their own sound. They each have their own types of oscillators. You can create sounds in Silent that you can pretty much create them in Serum, but there are sounds in Serum that you cannot create in Silent. So layering them together can create, in theory, a brand new, unique hybrid sound, which can be what makes your track interesting and fresh, right? So that's a great reason to layer. Now, the next reason why I think you should layer is frequencies, right? Let's say you have chord patches and you want one patch that has a lot more like sizzle to it to kind of sit in the top end, right? And then the other patch that maybe it's a saw or square hybrid type thing, maybe you don't want that to have as much sizzle with it, or maybe you want it from a different synth because you want to layer together different unison styles, that sort of thing. Then it's a great reason to layer. But frequency layering is different than just fuller and bigger in the mix. I think you can get a fuller, bigger sound by mixing first as opposed to layering. And it's easier, I think, to just throw on a compressor, add some saturation before you layer. And if it's still not big enough, well, then maybe you do need to layer. So check out this ARP. I have an EQ on it, taking out some of the low frequency, and then it's also boosting some highs. I have a virtual mix rack with trimmer and air EQ. And let me turn both of these off real quick. So here it is just out of Serum. Right now Shane from like 5 or 6 years ago would have been like, oh yeah, I got to layer this to make it cool. Well, I tried mixing it first, and this only took a few minutes. So listen to this difference. With the EQ before it. It has more life right there, right? And then I applied some delay via Native Instruments Replica, and then I sidechained that in my compressor to the kick, right? And we put all that together. Versus. Right, so as opposed to just trying to layer in another ARP or copying that pattern and playing it myself, I mixed it first and it worked. So try that first if you find yourself kind of struggling with layering. If a lot of you guys recently have asked me about layering and synths and all that, this is probably the best advice, is try mixing what you have first, just quickly, add some saturation, maybe some compression, maybe some parallel compression, reverb, delay, and if that doesn't make it sound how you wanted it to in the mix, well then maybe it is time to layer, but try to reference those 3 pitfalls that we talked about earlier in the video. If you guys have any questions or comments, let me know below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm Echo Soundworks. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I will see you next time.